Angry. I don't get angry very often, but a couple of my experiences on CroisiEurope, which is kind of the Lidl of the seas and rivers, it left me fuming and left me disappointed and left me wondering if my problem was I was English. I'll come to the first of the angry moments very soon, but I want to explain the Lidl reference with CroisiEurope. And I should say that, in my opinion, it's a positive. It's not a negative that I'm comparing them to Lidl. Now, the comparison is not because they've got a middle aisle down the ship, nothing like that. It's that they're a family-owned company and they control everything in the process. They build them, they own them, and they run them. And they have real control on their ships all the way through that process. They also have real control of everything that goes on in the ship itself, from the catering, from the laundry. Everything is done by CroisiEurope, not done by an outside body. Then we come to the food, and we'll talk in more detail about that a little later on in the video. But in terms of cost, the breakfast is a buffet, and the two main meals at lunchtime and at dinner time are 3-course, exactly the same for every single person, apart of course from if you're a vegetarian or you have dietary requirements. But other than that, everyone has the same food. So managing that and getting cost control out of that is a plus for Croisi when they're trying to keep the cost of their cruise down. As regards drinks, they're largely included in what you pay when you come on board the ship. You can get some extras for higher quality wines and some cocktails, but generally the drinks are included in what you pay when you come on board. Excursions, well, they're extras. Unlike some other cruise companies, you don't get them included in the cost of what you pay for. So once again, that price that you look at when you try and book a cruise with CroisiEurope, just remember, it doesn't include the cost of excursions. Another area where they appear to have some control on cost is where they dock. So, for example, when I was in Bratislava, when I was in Budapest, where we docked with CroisiEurope was further away from the city centre, which I would assume is a little bit cheaper and hence the lower cost that you would pay for CroisiEurope. A final sailing that you will see with CroisiEurope is with the staff. You'll see them serving you at lunchtime, working in the bar, some of them working as well, cleaning the ship, also helping you take the luggage out of your cabin when you leave at the end of it. So they certainly get the most from their crew in terms of doing multiple roles. Angry moment number one is straight after I tell you about the boarding process. It was very simple. Walked on board our boat, which was the Vivaldi. You had a welcome drink, and then I would say within 2 or 3 minutes, I was down in my cabin. Because we were going outside of the European Union, we had to give our passport in, which was used when we went into Serbia, and we got it back later on the voyage. And so to my first moment of anger, and it came on the second day with CroisiEurope, but actually the first day when we're leaving the riverbank and heading into the Danube. Now, I was up on board filming these shots of our boat leaving the side and heading towards Bratislava. And it was a busy day because we'd been in Vienna in the morning when we'd seen the Schönbrunn Palace. And then in the afternoon, we were going to go on to Bratislava. Now, most of the time when I travel for this channel, I travel on my own. But usually in the summer, I'll travel with my family. And I was doing that on this occasion. So whilst I'm up on deck filming, something is happening in the dining room. I head first before going to the dining room to my cabin to put my cameras away. In a way, I wish I'd had them with me because I could bring you some footage of what happened. But I came into the dining room and I went to sit at the table and my mum was quite upset. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've got a mum who's upset, I'll take people giving me issues and having a go at me, that's fine. But if you upset my mum, is it a son thing? I don't know. Maybe you can tell me if you're a daughter and you feel the same, but I wasn't happy with it. But I was a bit confused because my mum was saying they want us to leave this table. They want us to move. They need us to go and sit somewhere else. And I was like, I didn't really, in truth, at that moment, take it all on board. So we then, with the help of the staff, moved to the other end of the dining room. And we're joined by an American couple that we got to know on the voyage. And they said to us, well, we've been told that you want us to sit with you, which just was not true. And then during lunch, I spoke to my mum, and it turns out that two French couples had sat on the same table with us. What happens with CroisiEurope is you're allocated somewhere to dine for the entirety of the cruise. And on this occasion, we'd been sat with a couple of French couples. But they had kicked off and they said it wasn't acceptable for us to sit with them. And to cut a long story short, by the time I got down to our table, the family were being moved. My family were being moved. And the more I sat there and ate my lunch, and then in the afternoon when I'm walking around Bratislava and talking to the American couple who were on our table, I'm thinking, wait a minute, why were we forced to move? If they're not happy, surely they should move. And it wasn't that we had upset them or done anything wrong as far as I'm aware, and yet we had been shuffled off to the side of the dining room. So one thing I said right at the start is I try not to get angry, but I was pretty cheesed off, it's fair to say. So I decided, something that I don't always do, that I needed to speak to the maitre d'. So the following day I managed to get hold of him and we had a chat, and I explained what had happened, and I said that I didn't think we were treated very fairly. And initially there was a little bit of a pushback about it. And then something clicked in my head and I was like, is it because we're English? Is that the reason that you've moved us? And before I say his response, I should say I'm not a little Englander here. You know, I'm somebody who was born in Germany. I've lived in Germany 16 years. I've lived in the Netherlands for a year. I've got a Swedish mum. I've got a Swedish family. I travel the world. I am not a little Englander. But it just fell. And remember, Croisier are a French company, and the majority of the people on this cruise were not English speakers. I would say maybe 10% at most were English speakers on this cruise, probably a little less than that. But it just felt like that. And he pushed back at me and he said, well, no, that's not the case. So I said, well, why were we treated differently? And he did try and defend it, but I couldn't help but feel that that was part of the reason. Now, like I said, he pushed back, but it's nonetheless, it just felt wrong. Why was the British family moved and the two French couples left where they were? And actually what in the end happened is they had a table to themselves, happily free of us. Now, I know you might be watching this saying, oh, you're getting a bit carried away about this. I've got another couple of stories to tell you, which may change your mind. The one thing the maitre d' did say during our conversation, and I think he's right on this, people shouldn't come on holiday to fall out with people. And he wasn't talking about me or my family, or certainly that wasn't the impression that I got. He was talking about these two couples that had decided that they didn't want us sat on their table. So whilst I wasn't happy with the entirety of how we were dealt with as a family, I certainly couldn't disagree with a maitre d' when he says you should come on holiday not to fall out with people. I would say this was generally a plus with CroisiEurope. I thought they were pretty good and not too expensive. I went on an excursion at virtually every stop that we made down the river, and I felt that on the whole, they were good. If you'd like to see how much they cost me, a link to a video which breaks down the full cost of my time on board CroisiEurope is on the screen now. But there was one excursion which once again underlined a feeling for me that maybe it was a bit inconvenient being British, being English. And I'll tell you the story. And once again, you're entitled to disagree, but you might understand why I had that little bit of an inkling feeling when this happened. So it was in Novi Sad. I was going on a walking tour around Novi Sad, and we were leaving the boat, walking up towards the fortress, and then walking around town. And the excursion, when it happened, was fine. But I'd walked off the boat and there was a small group of us, about 8 or 9, maybe 10 people, and we were all waiting for our guide to come along. And the local guide walked along talking to everyone, and then talked to me. And I replied in English. And she looked at me and she said, "You're English?" And I was like, "Yes, is that a problem?" She looked again, and then there was someone from CroisiEurope with us, and she went away and talked to them and then went back on the boat, came back to me, and she could tell that I wasn't angry, but I was a bit miffed, I think is the best I could say. And she actually, to be fair to her, apologised for how it had come out initially. And then she went out of her way, and I have no issue with her as a guide. She went out of her way on the tour itself to make a point of talking to me because she'd learnt my name, and we walked around this tour. And whenever she had to talk in English, she was doing, from memory, she was doing Spanish and French, but she was also doing English. So, you know, hats off doing all those languages. She would turn, and rather than say, I'm going to do it in English, she would say, Michael, and then she would talk to me, which was quite funny because normally when I'm on these tours, I'm trying to film and create videos to show you about my experiences. So I kind of hang at the back, and it was almost like I had the earpiece in, and I'm like, got to wake up and listen to what she's got to say. So like, the guide was excellent. It was just that moment. You know, it's another moment that I'd already had that experience 3 or 4 days before. And you know what it's like when you're on a holiday, maybe things get distorted a little bit, but it didn't leave a good impression. The ship that we were on itself, the Vivaldi, it was my first river cruise. So I have nothing to compare it to in terms of river cruises. However, I would say the boat was fine. It was pretty typical of what I've seen other vloggers show of other boats that go up and down the Rhine or the Mosel, or indeed the Danube as I was cruising. But it was a little bit dated, a little bit tired. It felt like a boat from the 90s or noughties. It didn't feel contemporary and up to date. It felt a little tired. And, you know, this shot of my cabin, this is fine as a cabin for me, but there were little things that just jarred a little bit. Like right next to where I get into my bathroom from my cabin, there's this little wooden box sticking out. I have no idea why that was there. I looked in my family's cabin who weren't with me. They didn't have it. And I assume many other people didn't. But it was just that little niggle that if something can just sum up the boat a little bit, that was it. It was fine. It was good. But it wasn't outstanding. But there again, we're talking about a budget river cruise, or certainly a budget river cruise compared to many other competitors. Can guarantee you one thing, if you're on a CroisiEurope cruise, you're not going to go hungry. There is plenty of it. But personally for me, I would say there was almost too much of it. You know, breakfast was a buffet, and then the lunch and dinner was a 3-course meal where, apart from for dietary reasons, you would have the same food as everyone else, which I get would make it cheaper to provide, cheaper to turn into the price of the overall cruise. So I understand the reason why it's there. But personally, at lunchtime, I don't need to sit down for an hour and a half, 2 hours, have a 3-course meal and spend all my time in the dining room. I'd rather be up on deck, watching the world go by, chilling out. And in truth, by the end of the cruise, I spent more time at lunchtime, sat up on deck. I usually had taken a couple of rolls from the breakfast buffet, and I had them with a bit of cheese or something like that, because that's all I wanted. Now, I know that that's quite similar to other river cruises, having watched videos and vloggers talk about it, and maybe you can tell me how that compares to other cruises. Let me know in the comments. But personally, fine in an evening, 3-course meal, I get it. But otherwise, I don't really need that at lunchtime. There is some of the food available from the boat that you can usually get in the bars and take up on deck and enjoy with a nice drink. So there are some other options, but personally, if they had a snack option at lunchtime, I would have absolutely gone for that. Maybe in the bar, a sandwich or something like that. I would have much preferred that to sitting in a dining room for a long period of time. As for the food itself, it wasn't quite my sort of food. It by no means was horrible. It was good, but it's not really my sort of food. With food comes drink. And the drink, well, there was plenty of that as well. Unless you wanted, as I said earlier on, some cocktails or some more expensive wines, everything was pretty much included. There was also water that you could get from dispensers around the ship, including next to the bar, but don't try and fill your water bottle like this guy. Do you have access to Wi-Fi on board? Yes, in theory, but I have to say my experience on board the Vivaldi in the summer of 2025, it was rubbish. It really wasn't very good. It felt like it was running off a sim, something like that, and it really struggled with any sort of use. Now, if you have a sim on your phone or an eSIM where you're roaming, you'll be fine because you're not far away from a riverbank and you pretty much most of the time got decent reception. So it's not a problem. But I would say to CroisiEurope, can you upgrade it? Could it be a bit better? I really wanted to sit up on deck and watch the world go by. I'd really enjoyed that. And you may have seen my previous videos when I've been on Havila and Hurtigruten, just watching the world go by. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to sit up on deck, close the world away, maybe have a book with me, but in seriousness, just watch the world float by. That for me is what cruising is about. And that certainly was for me what I wanted river cruising to be about. But there are often things going on in the bar, in the middle deck of the ship, like quizzes, those sorts of things. And the problem with that was you couldn't escape it. Upstairs, the speakers were on, so that might be a brilliant quiz to enjoy when in the bar, but when you're sat on the top deck, just watching the world go by, trying to chill out, you don't really need to hear about a quiz or a music quiz going on. I would always say that if you have good crew on a boat or if you have good staff in a hotel, they can make or break your time on board or your time in the hotel and how good your holiday is. And on the whole, I felt they were very helpful and very good. Some of the senior members of crew could at times be a bit rude, in my impression. You know, once I was talking to one senior member of crew and she literally mid-conversation turned and started talking to somebody else who had interrupted. And I was like, wait a minute, can we just not finish what's going on with me? But I think I need to balance this. And I know this can sound like I'm being negative. I'm really not. But I should also say that when we were on board the boat, one of the passengers was taken ill when we were coming into Romania and towards Bulgaria. And the good news is that certainly by the end of the cruise, my impression was that this man had recovered. But when there was the thanks going on the final night, he was quite emotional towards the member of crew that I'd been a bit upset about, but he was quite emotional towards that member of crew, thanking them for what they had done to help him when he'd had a difficult moment. So I think in that circumstance, you can really judge for yourself how you want to think about what the crew was like on board the CroisiEurope boat. I would say on the whole, they were good. I'd had some niggles, but look, at the end of the day, the most important thing, if you have a health moment and they're there to help you, then that's got to be a big plus, hasn't it? On the screen now is how much I paid for the cruise. And now this is how much I paid for my excursions. And there's quite a few excursions in here. I went on an excursion in Vienna, in Bratislava, in Budapest. I went to see the Cowboys in Hungary. I went on an excursion in Belgrade. I went on 2 excursions in Rus, 1 in Romania. You know, I went on a lot of excursions. So I don't feel like this is too expensive. If you'd like, as I mentioned earlier in the video, the full breakdown on all those individual excursions, then a link is on the screen once again, and you can go to that video for the full breakdown. Before I give you my overall impression of my time on board CroisiEurope, I need to talk about low river levels. This happened to us. It's the nightmare, isn't it? When you book a river cruise, you hear so many stories of, oh, there was low river levels and I had to spend my time in hotels and in buses. Well, we had low river levels right at the end as we were getting towards the Black Sea. And what it meant is we couldn't go all the way to the Black Sea on the boat. We had to get a bus for the final leg. It wasn't ideal, but I don't see what the crew could have done any different. And actually, they handled it, in my impression, pretty well, because what they did is the excursion that we booked to go around Constanza, they had basically made it free for everyone. Those who weren't planning to go on it got to go on it for free, and those of us that had already paid got a rebate, and I did get a rebate. I got my money back. What they also did really well is they made sure that we knew very early that the port that we were going to disembark from the boat with was going to be a different one because of the low water levels. So that gave us an opportunity to get in contact with our transfer company and they could move our pickup point further down the river, and that all worked out fine. So I have no issues at all with Croisi in terms of how they handled the low water levels in the Danube. The question, would I book a river cruise with CroisiEurope again? Not at this stage. And it's not for the reason that I didn't like it. It's because I kind of feel like I need to try another company. I need to see what river cruising is like with a different company, how it compares in terms of cost, how it compares in terms of experience. I've done that in Norway. I've travelled with Hortin, I've travelled with Havila. It left me with the impression that I would at the moment prefer to go with Havila. I know many of you would disagree with that, but that's where I am with that. So once I've been on one or two other river cruises, I probably can fairer say whether I travel with Croisi again. I have no issue with them, apart from those moments that I talked about where I felt that the treatment wasn't quite right. But I can't truthfully say yet whether I would travel with CroisiEurope again until I've experienced other river cruises.